Welcome, everybody. I'm Laura Allen. I'm here with my colleague, Chris Sarabia. He's doing technical support. Thanks, Chris. We're starting the first part of our educational series on Graywater. Today's topic is Graywater 101. It's it's actually a 45-minute presentation, and we'll have time for questions spread throughout the webinar as well as at the end. We're having 4 more webinars coming up this year: Plumbing 101 for Graywater installers, how to design your own laundry to landscape system, gravity flow, branch drain systems, and Graywater irrigation in arid climates. And the last one is Southern California fruit trees, how to irrigate your home orchard with Graywater. So we hope that you will join us for those. All of these are going to be recorded, so you can watch them at your leisure. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. There is a chat box on the left. You can type questions in there at any time, and we'll answer them. We'll take a few pauses in the presentation and answer those questions. You can also view the slides as a full screen if you put your cursor over the upper right corner. There's a little box that will appear, and you can view this as a full screen. So we're going to get started. So today we're talking about Greywater, and this is hosted by Greywater Action, and I'm Laura, one of the co-founders. We're going to do an introduction to Greywater just to get us all on the same page. We're going to talk about some general considerations that are going to be true for any Greywater system you are considering. We'll talk about some common types of Greywater systems, including their costs and the relative difficulty of installing them. And then we'll talk about some general design considerations. We're going to end with some resources, so you will get to know where to go if you want more information. And just to take a quick step back, most of us in the United States have a really abundant water supply. We turn on a tap and water comes out. And when you're not watching the news about all of the restrictions and shortages, it can feel like we have this unlimited supply. We don't ever see the taps go dry for most of us. And we often forget that all of our taps and all of our water systems are connected into the natural world. So when we're taking out the water, we're taking it from somewhere. And we end up using a lot of water. If anyone doesn't know how much water you use on a daily basis, this is a gallons per day number. It's a great exercise to figure out how much you use, and that can be a great way to help conserve and use that water the most efficient way as possible. So Graywater, this is the water that we already used in our home. It's so simple, and it makes so much sense to simply take that water and use it outside into our landscape. For people in Mediterranean climates, this water supply is abundant all throughout the dry season. It's abundant through droughts. It really is something that we will always have as long as we have water coming into our home. And as I'm sure you're aware, we use about half of our total residential water use outside the home and about half inside the home. And the half that we're using outside the home, that's going for irrigation. And our plants, they really don't need the same quality of water as we do in our home to drink and cook with and shower with. So Graywater is a great match for our landscapes because they can thrive on that type of irrigation water. So this is a picture of a home with all the different Graywater sources, and you can see the blue lines coming from the fixtures out into the landscape. If you're reusing your Graywater, so if you have a yard, you have plants, you're watering them, and instead of watering them with the tap, you're now watering them with a Graywater system, you're going to see a reduction in your water use. And how much reduction you see depends on a couple of factors. It depends on how many fixtures you can access. In this picture, you can see all of the sources are going out. This home has a crawl space where you can access the plumbing. Homes that have access to all the Graywater sources are going to see a bigger reduction than homes that maybe are built with a slab-on-grade construction and don't have access to a lot of the pipes. They're not going to be able to utilize as much. And the other factor is how much of your landscape you're currently irrigating and how much of that you can replace with the Graywater irrigation. I wanted to show you a chart that we created after doing a study of graywater systems. This is in Central California, the Bay Area, a little bit south into the Santa Cruz area and Monterey area. We saw an average household savings of 15,000 gallons a year. This is per household. And you can see the red line was the water consumption of these homes before they installed their graywater system, and the black line is after. And this is really what, if with a properly designed system, you will see these reductions of the total consumption of water. Getting to the bigger picture in our state, how much water do we have overall of graywater that could be utilized for other things? We have about 1 billion gallons of graywater every single day that's being produced. And for the most part, that water is being wasted. It's being discharged into the ocean or to rivers, and it's not being utilized. So in our own home, we have a pretty big potential for reducing our water consumption, and as a state, we have an enormous amount of water that we could be reusing. So getting into the graywater, graywater is water from your washing machines. That is usually the best place to start, the best fixture or appliance to look at when considering a system. Washing machines produce a large amount of graywater typically. If you have a top-loading machine, every time you do a load of laundry, it produces about 30 to 50 gallons per load. So you would multiply that by how many loads you do per week and get your weekly graywater production, which is how many gallons you have to irrigate your plants with. Front-loading machines are about half of the water of a top loader in general, 12 gallons to 25, depending on how efficient your front-loading machine is. And the top efficient machines, those are the top-loading machines that don't have an agitator. Those are around 15 to 25 gallons a load. So knowing what type of machine you have and knowing how many loads per week you do, you can calculate how much graywater you have from your washing machine. Showers and baths are another great source of water. To calculate how much graywater you're producing from your showers or baths, going to the shower, you would need to know the gallons per minute of your shower head. Most of them have it written in very small letters on the shower head. You can also simply get a timer and measure for a minute how much water comes out and then measure that. So you can figure that out and then figure out how many minutes per day people shower or how many minutes per week people shower and multiply to find that amount of water. Baths it depends on the size of the bathtub, but they're usually around 30 to 50 gallons in a bath. It's a great source of graywater, though it's often more difficult to access the water. So in some homes, your showers and baths aren't going to be very accessible. And the third source is sinks. In California, bathroom sink water is considered graywater. Kitchen sink water is not considered graywater. So it depends on what state you live in if kitchen water is going to be classified with graywater or if it's not going to be classified with graywater. And that's something that in California we need to change so we can ensure that all graywater sources can be reused legally. Graywater is never from toilets. It's also never from washing poopy diapers. So anything that has fecal matter that's considered black water, that's not considered graywater. Just a little bit of history of the legality of graywater. In California, before 2009, it was pretty difficult to get a permit to install a simple graywater system. So therefore, people still reuse their graywater, but they weren't able to get the necessary permits, and so they installed systems without them. There's an estimated 1.6 million illegal systems in California until the code changed in 2009. After 2009, it is possible to install several types of systems legally, and some don't require a permit. And we're going to go into detail about the systems that don't require a permit. Those are usually the easiest to do, and you can install them without asking permission or having to pay any fees. And the other systems that do require permits, it's easier than it used to be to get a permit, but there still are some difficulties depending on where you live and what type of system you're interested in installing. So if people ask you, is graywater legal? The answer is yes. There is a chapter. It's in the California Plumbing Code. It's Chapter 16, and that is the chapter that regulates graywater. You can, if you want to see that chapter, we have a link to it on our website, so you can read it and look it over. So there's a lot of benefits with Graywater. The water savings is the obvious benefit, and that's usually the reason most people are interested in looking towards Graywater, is to save the water. It also saves time. It's an automatic watering system. It also saves energy. In anywhere, and particularly in California, in Southern California especially, our water is moved, transported over very far distances, and that takes a lot of energy. Energy to move and treat water is one of the biggest consumers of energy in our state. And so when we save water, we're also saving energy. So that's a benefit that helps all of us. It's kind of a community and societal scale benefit. We don't actually see that benefit on our energy bill, but we know it's happening. Using Graywater also fosters a connection to our landscape. Whatever we're putting down the drain is now going to our yards, and that's actually a good thing because it makes us pause and think about what we're putting into our drains and what we're putting out into the environment. And it usually encourages us to use healthier products that aren't going to be harmful to the earth or to ourselves. And there's more. Since we're not having an interactive discussion, I'll just let you guys think about what else, and there's definitely more benefits. So there are two main ways to use Graywater. The number one way is to use it for outdoor irrigation. It's the most affordable. The systems are the simplest. They require the least amount of maintenance. And it's easiest to get permits to use Graywater outside to irrigate. If you don't have any irrigation, so you don't have a landscape, or if you're in an apartment building where there's a lot of water and not a lot of plants to water, Graywater can also be used to flush toilets. So the toilet flushing systems, they are a little bit more complicated because they require filtration and disinfection, and they require more maintenance. And currently they are more difficult to get permits for, but it's definitely possible to flush toilets with Graywater. So if you're in a situation where you don't have a landscape to irrigate or you have too much water, you can consider that second option for reusing Graywater. So the rest of the talk is going to be about irrigation. So when we're putting the water that we used in the home and sending it outside to irrigate, what we put into the water is going to determine the quality of water as an irrigation source. So if you're using Graywater to irrigate your plants, you need to use, we call them plant-friendly products. They're products that are not going to harm your plants. Some of them are even a little bit beneficial. These products don't contain high levels of salt. So they're not, if you imagine like a box of powdered laundry detergent, all that white powder is tons of salt. We don't want to be putting that into our landscapes. The products are not going to contain boron. Boron is a plant mycotoxin, so it's toxic to plants in small levels. So you don't want to be using a product that contains boron in it because over time the boron could build up in the soil and damage your plant. And you don't want to be using chlorine bleach. Chlorine bleach will kill the soil microbes, and we want them to be happy and healthy to keep the whole soil ecosystem and our plants happy. So you want to avoid all of those things. There's a lot of different products. They're not hard to find. You just need to know what you're looking for. There's a list here. Ecos is a brand that is sold at Costco, sold in a lot of major grocery stores. Biopack is a brand that might be a little harder to find depending on where you live. Trader Joe's has a suitable detergent, and there's a lot more. So you don't necessarily have to go through a lot of trouble to find it. You just need to know what you're looking for. I want to note that 7th generation, they make a laundry detergent that on the front says Graywater friendly, but if you turn over the back and read the ingredients, it has all of these things that are harmful to plants on them. So you want to do a little more research than just what it says on the front of the detergent. If you have a water softener, you don't want to use sodium-based water softened water. You could switch to potassium salts, or potentially you could bypass one of your fixtures if you are in that situation. So something that's different about Graywater than how you're probably currently irrigating is that Graywater is not potable water. So we have to treat it a little bit differently to be responsible for human health as well as the health of the environment. Because it's not potable, we want to make sure that Graywater isn't in pools or puddles where people, like especially children, could have direct contact with it. We want it to just soak into the ground and irrigate the roots. Because Graywater has products in it, those products contain nutrients, And so we don't want those nutrients to get out into a waterway. So we never want gray water to run off into the storm drain system, which could take it into a creek or a river. So gray water should never leave your property. And because gray water is not potable, it could have germs in it. You don't want gray water to be put directly onto an edible portion of a food crop, like those carrots. If gray water touches the food, the edible part of a plant, and someone else ingests it, then they could eat germs, and that's not good. So gray water is not allowed to water edible root crops. You can water edible plants just fine as long as the food is above the ground and the gray water is going down into the ground and soaking into the soil. And maybe we'll stop there and see if there's any questions about this kind of introductory part.
Yeah, there's a couple questions. One was just a logistical question, is will I be receiving invites for the upcoming webinars?
Yes, you will.
Okay. And another question is, how do you figure out how much water you use daily? How do you do that exercise that you suggested earlier?
So if you get a water bill, you can figure out, usually it tells you, it might tell you in gallons per day, or it might tell you in units of water, and then you'll have to do a little division. If you're on a municipal system, they usually have some education on their websites about your water bills and what it means, and so that I would point you to the website of your supplier to give you the details of how to read your water bill. If you're not on the municipal system, then you can do the exercises like we talked about with the washing machines. You have a top loader or a front loader, and the showers, your shower head, and the gallons per, or how many minutes you take a shower with. So you just go through and do that with your fixtures. There's actually tons of great resources online with this that even you can just plug in the numbers to some websites that, and they'll calculate it for you. I believe Save Our Water has that calculator on it, but if it doesn't, if you just put any Google search, how much water do I use per day, there's a lot of organizations that have created those online calculators to help you figure that out.
Okay. The next question is dishwater gray water, and what about from dishwashers?
So dishwashers are currently classified as the same as kitchen sinks as black water, so they're not technically gray water in California. Other states, that's a different situation.
Okay. I have sub-irrigated raised beds that I'm currently irrigating with municipal water because I'm not sure if it's okay to fill the reservoir with gray water. Everything I've read recommends using gray water within 24 hours or before it turns to black water. For the reservoir and the raised bed, though, I'm not sure how to use the gray water without filtering it first. Do you have any advice as to where to find the information for using gray water safely in sub-irrigation?
So maybe we'll save some of those questions might get answered as we go through the systems, though we don't specifically address that. But you're right, you don't want to store gray water. If you store it, the nutrients will break down. It will start to smell bad. It will get kind of gross. You want to use gray water as soon as you can. Some of the systems have a tank to temporarily store it. We call it a surge tank. It's not storing it. It's just collecting the daily surges, and then usually it's a system that has a pump in it, and it pumps them out. So maybe we'll go through the systems, and then we can come back to more questions, and they possibly might get answered. So we're going to talk about a couple of vocabulary words that we use in gray water systems. The first one is mulch, and these are just wood chips. They're the same wood chips that you use to prevent soil evaporation. But in a gray water system, the wood chips are acting as a filter. The gray water flows through the wood chips. The wood chips catch the lint and the grease and the particles, and so the water can soak through without clogging the soil. They also act as a sponge, so they can soak up a lot of gray water and then more slowly release it into the soil. So we use mulch. We create in our systems what we call a mulch basin. This is the shallow basin. It's filled with the wood chips, and that's where you're going to discharge the gray water. It'll be located near a plant you want to water, and the basin is going to spread that water out and provide surge capacity and prevent pooling and runoff. So there's a picture of one. We also use what we call a diverter valve. So in all graywater systems, you're going to have a way to redirect the water back to where it used to go, either your sewer system or your septic system. And so they allow us in a really easy way to control the flow. Maybe you want to bleach your clothes every once in a while, so then you would divert the water back to your sewer system if you were doing that. Or maybe somebody comes or your child wants to dye their hair, or whatever reason you're going to have things going through the system that aren't healthy for the plants, you can simply turn that valve and redirect the flow. Before we get into systems, I just want to note that we can always start right away using our gray water with a simple bucket. We can even collect what we call clear water or cold water, like as the shower is heating up. It's a really easy thing that I bet many of you are doing. And all those little bits we do can really add up to be a lot of water. You can use a bucket in your shower, you can use a dishpan in your sink. And if you're using a dishpan in your sink, you want to make sure you're using a good product that isn't harmful to plants, and then you can carry that water out. And some people wonder, oh, well, I'm not supposed to officially use kitchen water. Is it okay to use a dishpan? And it is, because the water isn't actually technically anything until it goes down the drain. So if you're collecting water before it's gone down the drain, it doesn't kind of fall under any codes or regulations. You should follow common sense and basic health and safety practices, but you're not going to be regulated by the plumbing code, which does regulate the water after it's gone into your plumbing system. So if you collect that water, you can use it for irrigation, or if you aren't using soaps that are plant friendly, you can always use that water to bucket flush your toilet by just pouring it into the bowl of your toilet. So we're going to talk about graywater systems now, some specific kinds, and I want to clarify that graywater systems as a general term, they can be really different from each other. The picture on the left, this is a very, very simple graywater system. There's a sink, the water's flowing out a pipe into a mulch basin by a plant, and that's a graywater system. The one on the right, you can see a filter, controller, irrigation zones, timers. The system's automatized. It's taking the water into subsurface drip irrigation. That's also a graywater system. And you can imagine that the cost, the complexity, the permitting potential requirements, all of that are going to be really different depending on how simple or how high-tech or complex your system is going to be. If you're installing a simple graywater system, these systems are really great for irrigating larger plants. They're excellent for trees, bushes, vines, larger annuals, and perennials. The reason is simple systems don't spread out the water in the same way that a drip irrigation system would, or a spray system, which you can't do with graywater. Simple systems are not suitable for lawns or a lot of small plants. The lawns are not suitable because you can't spray the water, and the many small plants spread out, they're not suitable because you can't logistically spread the water over that big area. If you want to irrigate a lawn or a lot of small plants, you need a more complex type of graywater system. We're going to talk about some types. First, a simple system. This one is called a laundry to landscape. It was first invented by a man named Art Ludwig of Oasis Design. This is a washing machine system that does not alter the plumbing, and it doesn't require a permit if basic guidelines are followed. This is true in California and several other states. So if you're in another state and you want to ask that question about your state, I'm happy to answer that at the end. Here's a picture. You can see that the washing machine has a discharge hose, and usually that hose is going into your sewer standpipe or a utility sink near your machine. And in this system, we connect a valve right to that discharge hose, and then one side of the valve is redirected back to the sewer or the septic, and the other side goes out into a new irrigation system. So this is separate from any other irrigation system that you may have. You've done a good design. You figured out how much water you produce, and then you look at your landscape and determine how much of your landscape you can irrigate, and then you'd set up an irrigation system. You can see the blue going out into the landscape. The materials are usually around $150 to $250 in parts, and if you hire someone, it's usually about a 1 to 2 day job, so it might cost you around $700 to $2,500 depending on how big your system is. Here's some pictures. So in the house, you have that diverter valve right next to your machine. The picture on the left, you can see the sewer connection is behind the machine, And on the right, the gray water is going down to the floor, and this is actually going through a crawl space and then out into the landscape. The picture on the right, the valve has that yellow handle, and then the gray water side is on the left, and it's actually going right out the wall. So that example on the right, they have an exterior wall, so the pipe can go straight outside. So you do need to have a way to get your pipe outside, either a crawl space or a way to get to an exterior wall and send that water outside. Here's a picture, a construction picture of the irrigation part. You can see that it looks kind of like a drip irrigation system, except all of the materials are bigger to prevent clogging and to prevent back pressure on your machine. So that main line is a 1-inch line, and the line going off of it is a 1/2-inch line. So we're not restricting the flow in the main line, and we have 1/2-inch lines that are large enough to let the lint and any dirt and debris in the water come out. That's landing in the mulch basin, which is near a plant, and so it's all going to soak into the soil through the mulch, which filters the water and then irrigates the plant. When it's finished, there's not a lot to see. You can see the picture on the left. It's irrigating a row of fruit trees. Those little circles are covers that are protecting the outlets from clogging, so that's a place you can open up and check on the system. On the picture on the right, those are kind of hidden around in the plants. And these landscapes are very well suited for a laundry to landscape irrigation. They're either fruit trees, or larger perennials or annuals. Maybe we'll see if there's any questions about the laundry to landscape system.
There was a question about how well the solids move through the system without the usual flow or volume.
Oh, from a septic system?
Just water flowing. Sorry.
Let's come back to some general questions at the end. If there are not any specific laundry to landscape, we'll come back to those.
Okay.
So we'll go to the next kind of system. This is a gravity flow system. It's called a branch drain system. And to install this system, you need to be able to access the drainage plumbing of your house. So you need to either have a basement or a crawl space or exterior plumbing or some way to get to that plumbing. It requires a permit, and the landscape must be lower than the gray water pipes. So here's a picture. This house has a crawl space. You can see the tub, and the shower water and tub water comes down, and there's a diverter valve that is under the house. One side of the valve continues on to the sewer, which connects to that toilet you can see coming down, and the other side of the valve sends the water out into the landscape. The reason this is called a branch drain is because the pipes are branching out and the water is draining by gravity to the plant. So you need to have the pipes sloped. If your yard is going downhill, that will naturally slope the pipes. If your yard is flat, you'll have to dig the trenches deeper as you get farther away from the house. The parts are around $250 to $500. Professional installations, usually around $800 to $4,000. Takes a lot more time to install this because of the requirement of sloping it to make sure the water flows by gravity. That's excluding permit fees. Depending on where you live, the permit could be very low cost and really easy to get, or it could add a lot of time and cost to your system. It really, really depends on your local jurisdiction. So here's a close-up of the valve. You can see on the left, the gray water is coming through the floor. There's the valve. One side's going to the landscape and the other's going to the sewer. And you can imagine that if your valve is under your house and you want to turn it off or switch it, you probably don't want to crawl under there. So you can add a motor to that valve and control it by a switch inside your bathroom or somewhere in your home. The picture on the right is showing a valve that has a motor attached to it. It's called an actuator, and it just sits right on the valve, and then it's a plug-in switch. So you just have to have an outlet to plug it into and then run the switch in your bathroom. So that's a pretty simple to do. So here's some construction pictures. You can see on the left, this is a branch drain system coming from a shower. This image is showing the whole landscape. This is a house in San Francisco, so the yard's very small, but it's a great picture because you can see everything in one shot. You can see the pipes are splitting off. Those little circles are the mulch basins. The Graywater, where it's being irrigated, and the basins need to be a certain distance away from property lines and buildings. So there's setbacks you need to follow to make sure you're not putting water in a place that could cause future problems. The image on the right, you can see the basin is starting to get filled with the wood chips. The pipe is coming in, and when it's finished, all of that's going to be raised up to the ground level. The plants are planted right next to it so they can access the water. And there's that system completed. On the left, the plants were planted, the system was finished, the plants were watered in. And on the right, it's a year later. And the homeowners reported that they never watered their yard again. The shower waters everything. So this is a great example because it can show how one shower can remove a portion of the landscape from irrigation. And in their case, it was their entire yard because their yard was very small. Now we'll get into pump systems. If your yard is going up a hill, or if you need to cross a large flat area, if you have a patio or some area that you have to get across before you reach your landscape, you most likely can't use gravity. Definitely can't if your yard goes uphill. And then you need to have a pump. There's different ways to do it. This is the most simple way. You have to divert the water just like the previous ones. You have a diverter valve. Maybe you have it with a switch being controlled in your bathroom. And then the gray water flows into this tank. It's not too big. It's just designed to accept water for about a day. You want it to empty at least once a day. So inside that tank is a pump. It's called an effluent pump. It's made to pump out dirty water. So you don't need any filters. The pump can pump out any hair, gunk, lint that gets down into the tank. It will pump it out. And you can send unfiltered gray water into your landscape if you use the larger tubing and the larger outlet. You will still need to have the mulch, the wood chips in the landscape, which will be your filter outside that prevents the soil from clogging. So the system is relatively simple, though more complicated because it does have a pump in it and a tank to locate. It does require an outlet, so you need to have somewhere to plug in the pump, and of course it uses electricity. If you're trying to get a permit for a pump system, pretty much anywhere in California, in any state, it's a lot more difficult to go through that process. So that's something that we need to work on to make sure that people can install pump systems legally with permits and not be asked to have kind of over-restrictive requirements. But you should know that right now it's a little bit difficult, though hopefully it will get better with those pump systems. Here's some pictures. You can see the picture on the left. That is in a basement. The gray water is coming down, going into the tank. There's an overflow that connects back to the sewer, and then the water is pumped out. The one on the right, that's in a crawl space. So the tank had to be buried under the ground, and you can see the gray water coming in. It's coming in the back. It's overflowing in the front right, and the white pipe going out is the pumped gray water. So now getting into filtered gray water. If you want to put gray water into small outlets, like a drip irrigation system, you need to remove all of the particles in the system before it goes into the irrigation, because otherwise it will just clog it right up. So on the picture on the left, you can see this is a gray water filter. This particular filter is a manually cleaned filter, so it requires someone to remove all those particles to wash that out on a regular basis so it doesn't get into the system. The picture on the right is just an example of drip irrigation. It's not actually a gray water irrigation system. But you can see how the water is spread out over a much broader area than the previous ones, which were directing the water in just specific points. You should know that even if you have filtered gray water, you need to use special drip tubing, and in general, filtered gray water is not compatible with most standard drip systems. So if you have a drip system in your home, most likely you're going to need to replace it or alter it somehow to make it compatible with gray water. Filtered gray water is still dirtier than the municipal supply. And then we'll get into the high-end systems. So high-end residential gray water systems are usually installed in new construction. They are quite expensive, and they usually are only going to be utilized if you can access all of the gray water and get all the water coming into one pipe, and that's usually done in the design of the home or maybe a major remodel of all the drainage piping in the home. So this system is done by a company called WaterSprout. They're in the Bay Area, and they have an automatic system. It filters the gray water. The filter is cleaned automatically, so no one has to be cleaning a slimy gray water filter on their weekend. The system has an irrigation controller that can manage your irrigation system. If you run out of gray water, it could bring in another supply of water, such as a rainwater supply if you have a rainwater tank, or a municipal supply if you don't. So it functions just like a standard irrigation system. It's very sophisticated. It can be monitored on a smartphone. You can see how much water you're saving. It's a whole other range of gray water system. The cost is much higher. These systems are around like $30,000, so they are mostly going into high-end construction. And there's a lot of systems now on the market that are whole house systems, so they're designed for either new construction or major remodels. And in Australia in particular, as well as Israel, there's been a longer history of people reusing water. So we're getting companies that have designed a system and use their system in these other places are now coming to California and the West Coast to try to tap into this market, because there's a high need here too for reuse systems. So some of these are relatively new. Some of them have been used in other countries. And there's definitely more than this. The one on the left, Water Renew, they have a system, and these are all these systems have irrigation controllers, timers. Many of them you can monitor on a smartphone, and you can see more about them on their website. So Water Renew has an Irrigate system. Nexus eWater, that's a system that also can capture the heat from gray water, so it uses heat pump technology, so you can actually reduce your energy use in your home by capturing the heat of your gray water, as well as it for irrigation. Gray Flow, there's a whole bunch of them now. And at the commercial scale, gray water systems are also very well suited. They're going to be the more sophisticated systems where the water is filtered, the filters are automatically cleaned, and they can irrigate potted plants, narrow rows, just really anything that an irrigation system can irrigate. This example in the picture is from the NRDC headquarters in Santa Monica, and it was installed by ReWater. They're a company that has done high-end residential and commercial systems for, I think, about 20 years now. They're one of the older companies out there. And before we kind of get to our concluding parts and the design considerations, I want to mention the pre-legal kitchen sink systems. This is California pre-legal. Pre-legal means that it's not yet legal. Other people might call it illegal, but pre-legal implies that the problem is the law. We need to change the law. Kitchen sink water is clearly not the same as toilet water, and it shouldn't be regulated the same as the toilet. So just want to share an example of a really successful kitchen sink system. This is at the Los Angeles Eco Village where I live. You can see in the middle there's the kitchen sink. There's the diverter valve right under the sink, and the gray water pipe is going through the floor and out of the building. The two pictures on the two sides of that sink, these are papaya trees that we had planted. The papayas sat in the ground for a few months. They didn't really grow. They didn't flower. They didn't die, but they didn't really show any signs of improvement after they'd been planted until they started becoming irrigated with the kitchen sink water. And a couple of months after they received this water, they got full of flowers and they got full of fruit, and they've been happy ever since they've been getting that water. So the plants can really show that kitchen water can be a great source of irrigation. It's more gunky, it takes a little bit more maintenance, and it has to be managed properly, but it should be a potential source that we can use responsibly. So I just wanted to show that. And now we're going to talk about common errors. So common errors, these are things that a lot of people do, and they often think of a gray water system as they might have learned about rainwater and applied some of the rainwater principles to gray water, and they should be quite different systems. Or maybe they're just thinking of gray water like a septic system or like some other source of water that's not gray water. So people often want to store it. They want to overuse pumps, and they want to misuse filters. So this little picture is kind of the classic example of what not to do. So this person said, I'm going to pump my gray water to the top of my property and store it in a large tank, then gravity flow it down the hill to irrigate through a drip irrigation system. So they've pretty much hit on all three things of what not to do. They're storing it. It will smell. The other thing about storing gray water is there's no reason to store it because it's produced every single day. So you create a problem without really a reason to be trying to do that. So storing it more than a day is really not a good idea. The other thing they did was they pumped it to the top of their property and then came back down by gravity. So they definitely need a pump in this system. They have a hill, but they don't need to pump to the top and then come down. They've just wasted energy. They should pump to the highest point that they need the irrigation, but they shouldn't go any higher than that. And the last thing is the misuse of filters. So they have a drip system but no filter. So you can imagine that that drip system would clog right up with unfiltered gray water going through it. And then this is just a little thinking exercise. What system would you recommend here? So this person, we all wish we had this house. They have a big crawl space. They have a downward sloping hill. All the plumbing is accessible, and they have 10 fruit trees. So what do you think should get watered? Or what kind of system would you recommend? You can see you got all the pipes accessed. You could definitely use the shower water. It's got a gravity flow. You wouldn't need a pump. The washing machine's accessible too. You could send that water down. So I'm seeing branch drains, launch to landscape. Yeah, you can definitely use those. They would be great choices for this site. And looking at this picture, this is a common situation, is that you have different sources of gray water and then you have different parts of your landscape. So if you take the source and water the area closest to it, that can help you irrigate a bigger landscape overall. So in this house, the shower is on the left side of the house. That water could come and irrigate the plants towards the left of the house. The washer's on the right. That source of gray water could irrigate to the right of the house. So looking at your different sources and thinking about where is the most logical and easy place to send that water. So some design considerations. You first need to think about what sources of gray water can you access. So maybe you can access all of them. Maybe you are limited because you have a slab foundation and your shower pipes are buried inside cement. Then you want to think about how much gray water your home produces. And there's a little bit of math to do, not too much, but you want to know this quantity because this is your irrigation potential. Then next you want to think about what plants will you irrigate. Looking at the layout of the home, the suitability of the plants, starting with the bigger ones, the trees are great, and then going down the line until you've run out of gray water. You're going to do a matching, the amount of gray water with the weekly irrigation needs of your plants. And you might need to do some more research. We are going to have a webinar that addresses this completely, so if you wait for that, we'll lead you through the steps. Otherwise, you might need to do some online research or a book, those kind of things to get that information. And a reminder to hydrozone. Hydrozone means keeping plants with similar water needs together. So with your gray water, you can create a hydrozone of plants that are suitable for gray water. Maybe you have an irrigation system that's currently set up and you have a zone for trees. Possibly you can replace that tree zone with gray water and then shut off that zone of your irrigation system. So think about how you can maximize your water savings with your design. And after you've done that, you'll choose a system to meet your needs. And your house might look something like this with different gray water sources going out to different parts of your landscape. I'm going to do some resources and then we'll have time for questions. Greywater Action on our website, we have a directory of installers. These are people who have taken our certification class for professionals. And if you want to find someone in your area, either for a consultation or to hire them, you can go to our website, click on Greywater Reuse, and then down at the bottom it says Hire an Installer. And you can try to find someone in your area if you want to hire somebody. There is a manual that you can download for free. This was put out by the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, and it's a how-to manual. It has step-by-step instructions for building the laundry to landscape. It has some information about calculating your plant water requirements, to figuring out how much you can water. It really has a lot of great info, and it's a free download. We have a direct link to it from our website. You can also get to it at sfwater.org. This is the book that I wrote. last year. It's a how-to book, so it will walk you through step by step how to build several of these systems and how to design them. So you can use that as a resource. There's a little video you can watch, Ask This Old House. We have links to all this on our website. I just wanted to highlight a couple of the most useful resources. And we have a question and answer forum. So if you have any questions, technical questions, you can even add photographs or drawings, really anything that you're having trouble with or general questions, you can post them on our forum and someone will answer your question. So I'll just leave this slide up with some of the resources, and we have a bunch of questions.
Okay, first question is how far away from my house does typical gravity systems travel, or a typical pump system travel?
So if your yard is flat and you are installing a laundry to landscape system where the washing machine is actually, the pump in the machine is pushing the water through your system, going 50 feet is a generally safe distance to travel. If your yard is downward sloping, you can go as far as you want. If you have a flat yard and you're installing a gravity flow system like the branch drain, you could go farther. You could go, theoretically as far as you want to, but your pipe's going to get deeper and deeper. So in practice, going more than 20 or 30 feet in a flat yard, it just gets too much work. So with a flat yard and a gravity flow system, you want to stay as close as you can to the closest plants around your house. Or if your yard's going downhill, then you don't have that problem. You can just go down as far as you want. If you have a pump system, you would get a pump that can go anywhere. You can go up a hill as far as you want. You don't really have a limitation with a pump system.
I have a slab foundation. Does that mean that I can't do a Graywater system for my shower, sink, and kitchen Graywater?
If you have a slab foundation, your washing machine will be your best bet to start with because you access the water by the machine from the discharge hose. First floor showers are probably not going to be an option. You can get creative, but without doing some kind of plumbing overhaul, you can't really feasibly access the shower on the first floor of a slab foundation. Maybe you have a second floor bathroom, and then you possibly could access that water. So you're going to be limited to washing machines and then sinks, because sinks you can access underneath the sink itself. If you want a permit for a sink, you'll probably have to get into the wall to install your diverter valve. If you're not seeking a permit, then you can put the valve just under the sink, not in the wall.
What system is best for watering a lawn without a major remodel?
You can't really water a lawn with a Graywater system without getting all the water and having a sophisticated system. You can, in practice, carry buckets of water and dump it on your lawn. You're not really supposed to, well, if it's in the bucket, it's not technically Graywater. There's ways to do it, but there's no way to do it without have a very manual system. And to do it legally, you'd have to remove the lawn, have a filtered Graywater system, put subsurface drip, and then put the lawn back down. So I would recommend you look at the other plants in your landscape that aren't your lawn, and consider maybe some landscape redesign. Graywater can be a great impetus to look at the whole landscape and potentially redesign, reduce the size of the lawn, potentially remove it, depending on your situation and what you want with your landscape.
Does the mulch need to be replaced regularly?
Yeah, great question. I forgot to mention the maintenance. On the simple systems, the maintenance is replacing the mulch, and it's about once a year, maybe once every 2 years. It depends on how much flow is going through your system and the size of wood chips you started with. So the less flow and the bigger wood chips, the longer maintenance intervals. Sometimes it can be every 3 years if you have big wood chips and not a lot of flow. But about every year you should be checking on a simple system. You don't have to replace all the mulch, but you probably are going to replace the mulch under the Graywater outlet. So you'd put your gloves on, you get a trowel or a small shovel, and you remove the decomposed mulch, which is now great soil, and then you replace it with fresh wood chips. So it's it's not a very labor-intensive process, and it should be done about once a year.
Do you have some names of some effluent pumps
Um, yeah, there's a whole bunch. Dayton is a good company. I wonder if it's on our website. I'm not remembering, but if you ask it in the forum and you can't find it, then we can answer it there. But there's several options. I mean, tons of options, actually.
Are there guidelines as to where the laundry to landscape diverter must be? Can I have my laundry to landscape diverter in the crawl space?
The diverter valves have to be accessible. That's what the code says. It doesn't specify where. It's very accessible when it's near the machine. And if you don't like how it looks, some people will put them in a little cupboard. So you open a little cupboard and then you can turn the valve. Having it, if you go down into the, I'm sure there's a way you could do it. I'm not imagining how it would work very smoothly to have it below the machine other than tapping into the drain of the washer. And then you would be having a different kind of system because you've tapped into the gravity flow drain, and you'd be having a similar system to the branch drain. To actually build a laundry to landscape system, you need the washer discharge hose directly connected to the valve to keep the pressure of the pump pushing that water through the system.
Okay. I am installing a laundry to landscape system thanks to one of Laura's workshops. Thanks. I am using it to water fruit trees that I had put in, but the nursery warned us not to overwater the trees in the winter. If I have too much water in the winter, should I just put the water into the sewer sometimes in the winter, or what should I do?
Yes, you definitely don't want to overwater plants, particularly if you're in heavy soils where the water doesn't drain through very quickly. So you do want to think about your soils and if you have problems with cooling and slow infiltration of water. If you have sandy soils or quickly draining soils, it's kind of a non-issue. So let's imagine you have clay soils and they can become oversaturated. So then you can just turn off the graywater system. Usually the amount of graywater compared to a rainstorm is pretty minuscule, but you don't want to, contribute to a problem if that problem is happening. So I would kind of play it by ear and see how the plants are doing, how your soil is draining. If you ever notice problems and the water is not soaking into the ground, you definitely want to shut off your system.
How do you ensure that water equally goes to each plant?
So that's a great question, and it has to do with the design of your system, and the systems are a little bit different the way you design them. This is an introductory class, so we'll have more detailed classes on each particular system throughout the series. But to briefly answer it, you design it first by figuring out how much water and how many plants. With the branch drain system, you design it in how you lay out the fittings. They divide the flow. In the laundry to landscape or pump systems, you can do things to control the flow where you kind of even it out by adjusting your system after you build it. And if you want more water to one plant, you can have more outlets, or if you want less water, you can be a little farther away or have fewer outlets in that area. So there's a couple of strategies to manage the flow of water.
Is any old free tree mulch I get from tree trimming services sufficient? And how far does water soak through a mulch basin? And how far apart should outlets be?
Yeah, pretty much any old mulch is going to work just fine. How far the water soaks through the basin, it does depend on your soil type. And you can observe how it soaks in. When you dig the basin, don't fill it in with wood chips, just leave it open and then run the flow or just use a hose to put water in and see how far it spreads out. In general, if you have clay, any type of clay soil, the water will travel all around the basin. So you usually only need one outlet per tree and the water will spread throughout the basin. If you have sandy soils, water goes down much quicker and it doesn't spread out as much, so you would want to be closer to the tree and potentially have more outlets to put more water around the plant.
Do soaker hoses work well for delivery of water, or will these likely clog?
They would clog. Yeah, they're not suitable for graywater.
Do solids, is there problems with solids not moving well with the reduced flow?
I didn't understand that question.
There was two questions like it. Do the solids that remain in the water move well enough through the system without the usual flow or volume?
So I'm guessing it's either about flow in your sewer, you're like getting your water out to the sewer line, or getting into your septic system. If it's your sewer line, if you have a properly plumbed home, your residential home, all of your water should get to the main line of your sewer by itself. If you have problems with your sewer line, like trees have intruded into the line and they've disturbed it, and you don't have good flow going out, then if you add a Graywater system, you potentially could see some problems that you didn't notice before, because before your shower water or your washing machine water was helping to push solids through. So Graywater might highlight a problem that was already there. It shouldn't cause a problem, but it could expose a problem. Your septic system, if you're removing water from a septic system, what you're doing is you are extending the retention time in the system, and all of the septic professionals I've spoken with about this, and septic designers, wastewater engineers, they've all agreed that it's a good thing to expand retention time in the system, and that removing gray water is actually going to help. It's not going to cause problems. So hopefully I addressed the question.
What do you recommend for people who might be traveling for an extended period of time and not generating water?
Yeah, so if you have a sophisticated, more advanced Graywater system, it can just bring in other water supplies. If you have a simple Graywater system, you have two options. You could ask someone to come water, or if you have a house guest, you could ask them to use your system. If you don't, then if you have an existing drip system, you could just keep it and shut it off for your Graywater use, and if you go away for an extended time, you could turn it back on to have like that backup.
Do branch drain systems always deliver the water in 2-inch and 1.5-inch pipes?
They do, in general. You possibly could, well, the reason, so branch drain, and we're going to have a whole class on them, but for just a little more about branch drain, we're using ABS, a black plastic drainage plumbing, and it only goes down to 1.5 inches. The fittings we need are called long sweep fittings, so they make a gradual turn, and that prevents clogging because the water moves slowly on the turn. It doesn't have to make really tight corners. Most other pipes, like PVC, that go down to 1 inch, if you're using fittings in that size, the turns are really tight and you could have clogging potentials. So if you need to move the water in any direction, you're going to have to stay into the larger size. There could be a situation where maybe you have one final really long straight run and you could reduce down in a really kind of specific situation. But in general, you don't. You just stay 1.5 inches.
Are there any really good toothpaste out there for use in gray water?
Toothpaste?
Yes.
Is that the question? I don't know. The bathroom sinks are usually a pretty small supply, and unless it's really easy to use the water, they're not a great option because of all the toothpaste and just there's more products going down the drain, and the quality is usually a little worse. So if your bathroom sink is already combined with your shower under the house and you can easily tap into both sources, it's fine to use it. It'll be pretty diluted with just a little bit of toothpaste. But if you have to go through a lot of work to get the bathroom sink, I would say you can just forget about that source and not use it because it's not very much water and the quality is a little bit lower.
And I have one more question, unless any more come in. What are your thoughts about recirculating pumps to save water from showers?
Yeah, so recirculating pumps are a great way to save water because the water doesn't come out until it's actually hot, so you don't have all of those gallons of cold water being wasted. So that's definitely a great strategy for saving water. So I think we're going to end here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. You can view the recording. You're going to get a link sent to you when it has gone live. And just want to remind us that we have these next upcoming webinars. Tell your friends if they want to sign up. They can get the recording to this one as well as be on the live broadcast for the other ones. The next one's October 28th, and that's the Plumbing 101 for Graywater installers. So thanks again, and I'll talk to you next time.